Hello, folks. Welcome to another edition of the Tom's Hardware Show. Today is November 11th, 11/11. Joining me today is Senior Editor Andrew Freedman. As always,
Hello.
I am your host, Michelle Ehrhardt, and today we are talking about the PS5 and Xbox Series X/S since it's been about a year since they've been launched. We'll also be covering news related to the Steam Deck, PS5 stock. We'll be showing off our accessories and our opinions. And there's also news related to the indie console, the Playdate. So without further ado, let's roll the thing. Hello, folks. Welcome again to the Tom's Hardware Show. We are here every Thursday. I am your host, Michelle Ehrhardt. Joining me once again is Senior Editor Andrew Freedman. How are you, Andrew?
I'm good, Michelle. How are you?
I'm great. So we actually have been seeing a lot more of each other recently because we've been going back to our office. We're both filming from home today. Maybe this is a little inside baseball, but it's been nice to see you, Andrew.
Likewise. You seem so far now that we're doing it this way.
So now that we're going back to our office, that's one little bit of return to normalcy, I guess. Still working out. But another return to normalcy, I think, recently is that it's been about a year since the latest console generation launched, the Xbox Series X and S and the PS5, and they're still really hard to get. But if
Yes.
you try your best, you can get them, and I managed to get mine a couple weeks ago. I finally am able to buy the hot new gadget, even though I had to wait a year. But Andrew, you've had these since launch, right?
Right. Yeah. I was lucky enough to have the chance to review them both, and the first year for the two of them have been really interesting because, in a way, it's been like a really protracted 6 months. In that, like you said, you still can't get these things, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that's really been the defining story. And I'm not sure that's what either Microsoft or Sony wants the defining story of their console to be, is that you cannot buy one. But beyond the fact, and they have taken very different tacks, and there's a lot of different like smaller stores in, but the overwhelming thing is that if you want to just go and get one of these before the holiday season, like, good luck to you. My thoughts and prayers are with you, because
Uh,
the
so I
the
have been talking with one of our colleagues, the most powerful tech journalist in the world right now, Matt Swider,
according to
who's
BuzzFeed. Right.
Yeah, I'm quoting BuzzFeed, calling him the most powerful tech journalist in
Yeah.
the world. He is actually the reason I was able to get my PS5, not through any internal connections. I've just been following him. He has 1 million followers on Twitter right now, and is how a lot of people are getting their hands on consoles because there's just a myriad of different ways that these things are dropping, and it's
Yes.
so hard to keep track of them all. You basically need someone whose full-time job is to be like a console stock reporter at this point, which is something I don't think I've ever seen before. I remember when the Wii launched way back when, midnight lines outside of Best Buy, but you could get that a few months after it came out.
Yeah. This whole thing, I mean, this is the year I think everybody learned about global supply chain for one
Mm-hmm.
reason or another. And it's still tough. I mean, Sony had said in its Q2 financial results that it wouldn't be making changes to its sales forecast, that, several factors are significantly impacting the supply. And then today that changed. Today, report from Bloomberg comes out that Sony has reduced its PlayStation 5 production outlook for the fiscal year, which goes, fiscal years are not normal years, right? So this will go into 2022, but that they'll come up 1 million units short. Xbox hasn't even been breaking out numbers at all, just saying it's the fastest selling console. And we're not really talking about Nintendo in this calendar because they're on a whole other calendar. But they also cut their full year, or it rather cut its full year forecast for the Nintendo Switch, citing chip shortages. So
Mm-hmm.
this, like,
And then
cars
we
and
have, if we
appliances and
go
graphics
outside of
cards, yeah,
If we go outside of Xbox and Microsoft, we also have Valve delaying the Steam Deck by 2 months, correct?
That happened yet? Yeah, so that's being delayed, and that was already going to delay over time. That's
Mm-hmm.
the first ones will no longer launch in December. They will launch in February, with everybody keeping their place in line. And like we were discussing about just before the show, and as you wrote about, they're having issues with the play date, which is also being pushed back due to A, they had some battery issues, but B, they actually had to redesign their main board to fit a different chip so that they could keep producing these, because it would take 730 days for them to get more supply of the existing chip.
So if you aren't aware, the Playdate is like a small little console that kind of sells itself on giving you a bunch of free indie games from known developers like Bennett Foddy, who made Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy, on like a bi-weekly basis. It's a bit smaller, but the company that made it published Untitled Goose Game, which you might have heard of. And it's been getting a lot of hype just because it's so novel, but it goes to show even smaller makers like these with tiny boards that are only about as powerful as a Raspberry Pi are even having to change their plans because of the chip shortage.
I mean, for a story I wrote yesterday, so you have to understand, yesterday was the 1-year launch of the Xbox Series X and S. And then tomorrow, Friday, November 12th, is going to be the 1 year since the PlayStation 5 came out. And we talk a lot about the pandemic, but for a story about that first year, I talked to Matt Piscatella at NPD, and he said, like, look, the thing isn't just about the chip shortage, it's about the pre-launch expectations were also lower. So they didn't have plans to make enough. Then the component shortage comes, so they can't ramp up, creating heightened demand. And then the people who you do have getting them were in the midst of a pandemic a year ago, were more engaged than ever trying to get them. And I thought this quote was pretty much it. I'll quote him. A set of circumstances we've never seen in this space, to put it mildly. You had more people with more dollars, and it's still kind of crazy. That being said, a lot has happened within these that aren't just shortages, right?
Right. How much of this do you think can be blamed solely on the pandemic? Like, there's the pandemic definitely causing shortages. There's the pandemic making gaming a lot more of a viable hobby in a lot of people's
Right.
lives, or even
And
a necessary hobby for some
yeah,
people, I think.
I
But
mean, we're never
it's
going to.
not just the pandemic, right?
Well, it is and it's not. There's more demand, I think, because of the pandemic. Like you said, people were pent up. More people were taking up gaming. I believe, you give me a number. It was just under 80% of Americans had played a video game in 2020. Yes, there we go. 79% of America played video games in 2020, 76% in 2021. So that's pretty high, and that they're putting in longer hours. So that created a thing that probably created the excess demand, and the pandemic helped create the shortage. Those two things combined were just a perfect storm. More demand, more dollars. People weren't going on vacation. They weren't going to concerts or sporting events or traveling. So some people, like the people who didn't, people like us who got to continue working their jobs, might have had some extra money that they were going to spend on their next vacation to buy a PlayStation or an Xbox with.
So
And
instead,
so,
I'll take a vacation to Midgar Final Fantasy VII,
I mean,
or
exactly. And so then,
even to New York. I live in New York, but I can't visit New York. So Miles Morales is a more authentic experience than I'm getting in real life.
yeah. So those two things together, not being able to ramp up because of the chip shortage plus increased demand, just created a disaster.
Yeah,
That
we
being
have
said, there
a
are,
comment here
yeah,
from a regular viewer, Ruru2M, who says no more travel, events, restaurants, since people spend all their money on home entertainment. So yeah, it just seems like I'm also curious though how much like the PC shortages affected consoles as well, because not only are PC parts like expensive, but they're also hard to get right now as well, and you need a bunch of them to make like a properly working machine. So if you get on the rare chance the opportunity to buy an RTX 3080, you're also going to need to build a machine around that so that you're getting the most out of your graphics card. in a lot of ways, a console is just easier than building a computer right now.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because in the Bloomberg report about the PlayStation 5 production decreasing, they cite an unnamed top Japanese game publisher, quote, has found players who used to buy PlayStation versions of its games are now gradually shifting to purchasing the PC edition, said an executive who asked not to be named.
Well, I wonder how
So
many people are playing those on lower spec
they,
on their
they, they might
existing
be.
machines.
I mean, it's hard to say how PC gaming and this have really intersected. You know, a lot of people who have PCs might want a PlayStation because they get the exclusive games otherwise, or they might want an Xbox so they can play the same game anywhere, or they might just like having a place where they can sit and like kick up their feet, and that's different. So it's hard to say there, but despite all of the shortages, there were some like other interesting storylines just in general regarding both console going through. So some of that has shined through despite the greater narrative of, hey, nobody can get one.
Right. So the interesting thing about PlayStation releasing a lot of its games on PCs now, it goes to show how incremental console updates have sort of become. Like, the N64 is like, oh, it's 3D now. The Xbox 360 is like, oh, it's HD now. And then the PS4 came out, it's like, it's better HD. And then the PS5 came out and it's like, it's better HD at solid 60 FPS most of the time.
I
I
I'm not
I
sure that's
quite like
giving.
the PS5. I've had it a few weeks. You wrote very positive reviews of both of the consoles. But to the average person, I don't think it's quite as exciting or easy as a sell as it used to be. What do you think?
Yes and no. I mean, I think it's a little more complicated than you may be giving it credit for on each end. Like, if I think Xbox specifically has adopted the mindset that you're speaking of, that, hey, this is a version of a computer. You can play with different versions of power, but it's still the same game. And I think they've really adopted that. By releasing two consoles, which is kind of unheard of in the Series S and the Series X. Both of them still very hard to find. The S maybe a teeny bit more. So those both have the 8-core Zen 2 CPUs, but the Series X has more powerful RDNA 2 GPU. And those are the ones where you've seen, I think, a lot of the difference in that the Series X goes up to 4K in games that support it. The Series S goes up to 1440p. But Xbox has adopted that whole smart delivery system, and that also works with Xbox One, meaning, hey, you can buy this game. You have an Xbox One right now. You buy, I shouldn't say this without knowing it 100% if it's supported, but let's say Halo Infinite is supported just for the heck of it. You buy Halo Infinite, play it here for now. When you upgrade to that Xbox Series S or that Xbox Series X, hey, you'll be able to play it there. And I think that that's very much a PC mindset there as well.
Actually,
So
I think then you could then take that and be like, then when you upgrade to that RTX 3080 or 3090, you can also transfer that purchase to PC, correct?
I'm actually, I think it stays within Xbox
Okay.
there, but
Well,
you
the
do get,
Xbox app is on PC.
yeah, but they're still definitely managing those as like different Windows and PCs, different platforms. But you're getting a lot
Gotcha.
of the same mindset there, as well as I think a very early storyline for the Xbox, because it released without Halo Infinite, was backwards compatibility. Almost every game going back to the original Xbox, except like some Kinect games, for instance, had it. And just like how like you could like over the pandemic, I bought like the original Half-Life on Steam and played it on on that computer back there like it never happened. So in that way, Microsoft very much approaching it like a computer. Some things like its SSD technology going into Windows 11 and later versions of Windows 10. There's
Hmm.
very much, I think, approaching it the way you said. When you get into the PlayStation, it was a little more traditional over the last year. I
Hmm.
mean, they released one console, like it's the one you. I mean, did you get the disc or the
So I
digital?
got the disc version because I have a decent Blu-ray collection and I want to be able to
Right,
watch them without having the PS4 in the same room.
right. But otherwise, they're the same console, which I think is fine. I think that's what a lot of people were expecting. And like you said, in that regard, people might just see it as the one-step upgrade. Can you wait? Can you not wait? also has your Zen 2 processor. Microsoft jabbed at it a bit because it has fewer compute units on the GPU, saying that only Xbox has the full RDNA 2. We've seen in the little bit that we've seen that performance has not been hugely different between the two on games. I mean, and really the only place where Sony did its like PC style thing was in the SSDs, which it took like 8-9 months to actually get into place. But so that was a much more, I think that's more of the type of thing you were alluding to. We're like, oh, this is the step up to more beautiful graphics.
Right. When we're talking about the consoles being sort of PC environments in a way, the SSDs are actually really interesting because not only is it like the first time that we're seeing this tech mainstream across both PlayStation and Xbox, but they're also both upgradable across both consoles in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah, so Sony lets you could take off those big white side panels, you get a screwdriver, you get in there, and as long as you fit it in there you need to fit in their guidelines, which include size and speed and capacity and having a heatsink. But you get in there and you can install it like a computer, which I think, as someone who likes to tinker like that, is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
The Series S and the Series X, Seagate is selling some little ones proprietary that you just plug in the back. I think that'll be easier for a lot of people. We're back
Kind of like a memory card,
yeah,
but it also really limits what your options are. At the same time, they say that the reason they do this is because they need it that way in order for it to work with the velocity infrastructure, which I think is interesting because a lot of that is coming to PCs as well, which has just a wide swath of tech.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions there about how that works, but I think like in the games itself, or just in the user experience itself, the SSD has been perhaps bigger, like the bigger improvement than anything else than graphics and bringing it up to like the PC level.
I will say that as someone who's been playing on both my PC and a base PS4 up until now, the big things that I've noticed is load times are almost non-existent depending on the game.
The PS5 is stupid fast in loading
things run at a solid 60 FPS now, which after gaming on PC, and surprisingly enough, the Switch is really good about that, despite being underpowered, is something I kind of expect in most of my games at this point.
So the PS5 is just stupid fast with that 825 gigabyte SSD, and also real fast off of SSDs inside. But like, I know we were talking the other day in the office about how you were playing Spider-Man Miles Morales, and like, yeah, you don't get those scenes of Spider-Man in the subway anymore because you don't need them. I think the game that was really biggest for showing it off on the PlayStation side was Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, where you would go through this wormhole, and then in a second you'd have a whole new world loaded, which opens up a new gameplay opportunities. On the Xbox, a little less of that. Obviously, everything loads really fast, but what impresses me most is being able to suspend games and like go to other games and have them quick resume. That for me is like something that, hey, like
the Xbox can do up to 5 at once, correct?
I don't remember the number exactly.
It can definitely do multiple, whereas the PS5 cannot.
The PS5 just does its one game.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that is something like, can they bring that to the PC, the suspending? Because that's really cool.
I mean, you could just background things, but then it might eat up a ton of resources still. So
yeah, not quite the same.
We have a question here from Rurutu M, who asks about I'm assuming the PS5 SSD performance. Is it the same as direct storage? I don't have an Xbox, nor do I have Windows 11, which doesn't really have a ton of support for that yet anyway. So I don't have a good basis of comparison. But despite not having a fancy blast processing name, the PS5 SSD has been incredibly fast for me. Andrew, you've been using both. What do you think?
So the direct storage is actually part of Microsoft's storage architecture. So it's a key part of what Microsoft calls the velocity architecture, which is supposed to make everything really fast. And that's what allows Xboxes to load all of the assets for a game from the SSD and ease the pipeline to the GPU and speed up loading times. So that's what's in Xboxes now, and that's what is coming to Windows 11 and I think to newer versions of Windows 10 as well. But developers are going to have to enable that in their games, so it's not just something you can like flip the switch on necessarily. But so that is what direct storage is. What you're seeing, what you will see in Windows, and what you do see now in Xbox, those are both direct storage. Sony is using its own proprietary embedded SSD that is doing other things.
So it's not the same thing, but I think the idea with direct storage is you're taking cycles off of the CPU and allowing things to load pretty much from the SSD to the GPU directly in a way. That's a huge dumbing down of it, but that's the idea.
Yeah.
But I'm curious to see when this comes to Windows, because I don't have an Xbox, how much of a difference it will actually make in my end experience, because I'm very satisfied in my direct storage-less PS5 experience right now.
I mean, ultimately, I think it will be, it's very similar in terms of things like loading times.
That's the other thing here, which is, whichever console has a granular improvement over the other, developers are still going to be developing their games for the lowest common denominator. So, they're not always going to necessarily benefit from being stronger than the PS5 if the game needs to run on the PS5,
Yeah, so that's the really interesting thing I think about in general is that what we in early reviews, like when I was looking at these right before they launched, I could only really judge them up with what their launch lineup was going to be, and I did not have every game, and what the specs and user interface were at launch. But the big thing that really sells these things, especially if you're looking to buy them now, are the series of games that have come out in the last year and that have been promised, and how they perform on there. And
I think that was a big reason I got the PS5. I
right.
didn't like the Xbox One's exclusives. I like the PS4s, and this seems to be following that same trend. God forgive me, Miles Morales was more fun for me than Microsoft Flight Simulator, and I'm saying this on a Tom's Hardware podcast. But also, I can get Microsoft Flight Simulator day one on PC. Sony's PC ports, which are a new thing, which does throw a bit of a monkey wrench into this, but they still come out like a year or two after the original game. Final Fantasy VII Remake, which I've been talking about a lot, is still just in the sort of leaking phase of that.
Yeah, and I say that because at the very beginning, and still to a degree, like Halo Infinite's going to come to Xbox One, is that there are still exclusives being made for PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. We've hit that 1 year sort of tipping point. It's sort of like tipped off now, but actually, I feel like this might be a good time. Like, do you want to talk about like the games that came out? Because I think that was really.
Let's talk about the games, because right now the only like exclusives that I can think that you really need a new console for are Returnal and Ratchet and Clank.
Right. So I think Sony's proven like over and over again in the last couple of generations that they make powerhouse exclusives worth buying a system for. That like if you have a PC and you don't want to wait 2 years for the port, that this could be a good investment. Spider-Man Miles Morales launched on PS4 as well, but you can't get that 60 FPS, and that's a big thing across both consoles that they put in like PC light options. Do you want ray tracing? Do you want what resolution?
So you don't have like a ton of, you don't in most games have an in-depth graphical menu where you can, select FOV and shadows and stuff like that. But a lot of games now come with a quality mode and a performance mode. And I'm sorry, I'm always going to choose the performance mode, but.
Right. So you had, otherwise on PS5, you had Demon's Souls on PS5, which I think for some people really matters. You had Asteroids Playroom, the freebie, which I think is delightful. And that's the one that sort of teaches you the controller. But it's actually
fell off of that in like an hour.
You should go back. It gets pretty deep. I love it. There's lots of great low fun things. I mean, there's Ratchet and Clank, which was PS5 exclusive. Returnal, which was PS5 exclusive. Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, which you discussed. And the console version of Deathloop, which is hilarious to me.
Deathloop is not on base PS4 or Xbox One?
It's just PS5, I believe. And it's not on Xbox One. It's only on PS5. So despite the fact that it's developed by Arcane, which is owned by Bethesda, which is now owned by Microsoft, the
Mm-hmm.
deal was already in place. So you have this PS5 console exclusive game that was made by Microsoft. I mean, it was, but that one was also released on PC.
The funny thing
So
is, though,
I
is
thought
that
that
I
was really
don't think
funny.
that's too rare for Microsoft at this point. At this point, Xbox is almost like a third-party developer with how much they're willing to work with other publishers, especially Nintendo.
Yeah, I mean, I think in this case, it really happened because like the ink was dry before Microsoft bought Bethesda, but it's still pretty funny. But again, this is the same year PlayStation's Major League Baseball also launched on Xbox, so you get that type of thing. Now on the Xbox, I feel like the titles were a little weirder because I remember the game, it started and like you're writing this review, they were just optimizing games for the Series X. Like, okay, we're
Mm-hmm.
going to make them faster or run better. And that was kind of weird. They were really heavily leaning
Well, they said like
on,
within the first
yeah,
year or two of launch that every game would run on both the One and the Series X, right? That's like part of their smart delivery PC-like infrastructure.
right. And then they optimized a lot of games. And then you didn't get your first exclusive till the Medium, which released late last year to mixed reviews.
Mm-hmm.
I personally wasn't a fan. Then that was a third party game, which is ultimately only done PC and PS5. It got plumped up with Flight Simulator, which had launched on PC months earlier, but is still a pretty big deal. Forza Horizon 5 just came out and looks gorgeous. And then you're getting Halo Infinite. So if you like all of like Microsoft's new stuff, the storage, the smart delivery, the integration between your Xbox account and your Windows account, then it's one big thing. And of course, Halo. It's like I think if one thing is going to be a juggernaut on the Xbox, it's going to be Halo.
Do you think
But
Halo still has as much pull as it used to? You know, Bungie isn't developing it. It's not like the first person shooter to really work on a console anymore like it used to be. Please don't get mad at me, GoldenEye fans. And it's got, that sort of arcadey sci-fi feel and theming in the era of, gruff military shooters like Battlefield and Call of Duty. It's a
yeah,
legacy franchise, but I skipped 4 and 5.
yeah, I mean, I'm seeing has been a lot of hype for it. I think it's really if you're a fan of Xbox, like if you're someone who knows like Xbox and system I want, you're gonna get Halo. They're so intrinsically tied together. The fact that they're releasing multiplayer as a free to play game, I think will reinvigorate for a lot of people. A lot of
I
people who
think
like
I think for
had,
me,
yeah,
actually,
right,
yeah.
having high school and college LAN parties and getting back to that, and then maybe they'll say, hey, maybe I want to see what the campaign is. But truthfully, like I think it's just a totally different business decision now.
I
The fact that
remember back in the day, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt,
no, it's
but
okay.
that sort of free multiplayer back in the day was all the rage with my friends with Combat Evolved because there was a demo you could download that gave you access to Blood Gulch multiplayer matches for free. And we kept sneaking that onto school computers with thumb drives and playing that in class, when the teacher wasn't looking. And I feel like free Halo Infinite multiplayer is the adult evolution of that.
Yeah, so I think that will get a lot of people to try it in general,
Mm-hmm.
and that look, they'll make money that way. The same way tons of other free to play games make money, and so I think that for a lot of people, Halo has always been multiplayer. So I'm curious to see that.
I feel
On
like
other,
what I'm hearing here is then like the choice is sort of like if you like those sort of single player, triple A, story driven experiences, you stick with Sony like you did with the PS4. And if you like these sort of sim, flight, or car, or like big multiplayer experiences, you want Xbox. And then, there's the occasional, deviance from that, like the medium or whatever.
I mean, I would argue the biggest thing has always been where your friends play.
Mm-hmm.
If all like this, but besides all the games we're talking about, because exclusives drive this, right? Whether or not you have a powerful PC and you're getting a side console, it's where are the people I play with going to play if you're into multiplayer games. If
Well,
they're
the
all
thing
on,
with Xbox is way friendlier with that than PlayStation has been
yeah, it,
traditionally.
it definitely is. Though I recently was playing Back for Blood and I was on PC and a friend was on PlayStation. It just felt like a new era. But like if your friends are playing NBA 2K22 or Call of Duty Vanguard, which can be played elsewhere, that's the big question. Where are my friends playing it? So I don't think it's necessarily fair to say, oh, I'm a fan of the specific genre, unless you're definitely a fan of like, oh, I want a game like I want Starfield, then I have to get an Xbox, or I want God of War Ragnarok, then I have to get a PlayStation.
Mhm.
And that's
Well, I
really
don't think
what's
we
more
should
limiting.
count that out because for a lot of people, I don't play. I used to more often, but especially since the pandemic started, I don't play a ton of multiplayer games.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a behavioral thing that like we can't generalize for everybody.
Right.
But the other big thing that we didn't talk about on Microsoft's exclusives is a little thing called Game Pass,
Yes.
which I've found to be actually to be a big deal. I hadn't really tried it a ton until the Series X came out. And on the one hand, I don't want to play every game on there. There's a lot of stuff on there that I think is like kind of whatever. But
Mhm.
there have been a handful of games I tried out because they were there.
Now,
If
I like Game Pass because it reminds me of video game rentals, which unfortunately died with video game
Blockbuster,
stores, which I think is a shame because there hasn't really been a great digital replacement for that up
right,
until now. I think Game Pass and also PS Now aren't a perfect replacement for that in a lot of ways,
right.
in that, there's still subscription services. They don't have new games on them, so you can't walk in and get Guardians of the Galaxy day one like you could in Blockbuster in the alternate timeline where Blockbuster is still operating.
I
But
think there's still
they
one.
are
Is the
still
one in
letting
Alaska
you.
still there?
Is The Last of Us still there? I think The
No, is
Last
there
of
one?
Us.
No, is there one still in Alaska? I said.
Oh, they're
I
in
think
Alaska. I'm not going to go to Alaska to get Guardians of the Galaxy, which just
if
seems
you
like a
are a
super
listener
rental
in
friendly
if
game to
you're a
me.
listener in Alaska, please send a copy of a rental of Guardians of the Galaxy for the PlayStation 5 to Michelle Ehrhardt at New York, New York, and it'll just find her way to
By
her.
the time it gets here, I'll have to ship it back immediately. I actually thought about going to Redbox to find it, but then I
Oh
realized
wow!
Redbox hasn't done games since 2019. So Xbox Game Pass and PS Now are
Yeah,
interesting in that you can play games on PC or console,
right.
Game Pass PC. Uh, Up until about, I think PS Now you can stream PS3 games to PC, but I'm getting off topic. You can play them for a limited amount of time, which is something you haven't been able to do
Right.
with, digital game purchases for a long time.
Yeah, I don't want to say that PS Now is kind of like a non-issue, but I think to a lot of people, PS Now is kind of a non-issue. Whereas Game Pass, they take all of the Xbox games day one, slap them on there. So if you really care about that can be a good deal if the math works out for you. And it's also if you have Game Pass Ultimate, then you can get not all of the same games. I don't understand how their licensing works exactly, but you can get them on your PC too. So if you're a PC Xbox person, that might be a good investment. And I think that really is what made the Series X shine for a lot of people over the PlayStation. The
I think
PlayStation
that's
has
also
better
what makes
exclusives, but
the Series S shine to me. The Series S seems like purpose built to be a Game Pass machine. It's not there to be the most powerful thing, but if you just
no.
want something to stream all the 360 and Xbox One and even some like PlayStation 1 and stuff games, like Final Fantasy 9 to your Xbox on your TV, without spending a lot of money, that's where you get a Series S, I think.
And so they each have their pros and cons types of games, but again, like performing in terms of which one performs better, how can we really tell? Compute units ends up thus far, both AMD APUs have been doing really well. The
Mhm.
SSDs have finally brought them up to parity with PC. So like on the one hand, it's just kind of great for everybody. For those who are still like holding out, it really stinks, and I get that. But the games are gonna probably really start catching up in the next couple of years as they're designed for this stuff. Like we've probably only seen like usual, we've only seen the precipice as they continue to
Yeah. So
wean themselves off the PS4 and the Xbox One.
the two big games that I've been using my PS5 for lately are Miles Morales and Final Fantasy VII Remake. both of which I'm very impressed with their performance and graphics, but also both of which are just optimized PS4 games. I haven't played any PS5 exclusives yet. It sounds like you have with Deathloop, correct?
I played that. Well, you're gonna get me in trouble. I played Deathloop on PC, actually.
Oh no!
Now, what's funny about that, and this is kind of a segue, is this little guy.
Yes, I wanted to make sure
Yeah,
we talked about that before the end of the
okay.
show.
Because Deathloop's a good segue into this. Xbox controller, fine way to play Deathloop on a PC. So is a keyboard and mouse, which it's a first-person shooter, so why not? That's what I missed out with the DualShock, is that they do have your fancy triggers, which can be forced. The adaptive triggers can be forced to stop anywhere. You have the really fancy haptics and rumble. The microphone, the touchpad is still there for better or worse. The Xbox controller got really nice ergonomically. You have the new, it's a little smaller. You have the new touchpad, but you can use they let you use your Xbox One controller for a reason. This thing, I'm curious what you think about it for the few months you've had it, because having had it for a year, I've had a huge shift in opinion.
So when I first got it, I was super excited. Well, actually, no, let's start with when it was first announced because I thought this
Okay.
thing looked dumb. I hated the color separation. I hated the little buttons in the texturing that my camera probably can't pick up, but the PlayStation shapes are textured onto the controller. I thought the adaptive triggers sounded like just the biggest gimmick in the world. I thought it looked too big. I still think it's a little too big, but that's because my hands are small. It's a little uncomfortable for me to like reach from X to square or whatever, but I get used to it. And when I first got the console, I was impressed that I think it actually kind of looks nice in person. The white and black blend together a lot more than I thought they would. There's also just like solid color variants you can get. But I didn't like the adaptive triggers at first also. I thought they were kind of painful. I thought they were kind of annoying. I enjoyed it in Asteroids Playroom, but I didn't think there was going to be a lot of use of them in the games. The thing that turned me around on the adaptive triggers were the driving segments in Final Fantasy VII Remake when you're on Cloud's motorcycle. Because when you're driving on that, you can really finely control how much you're accelerating because of the resistance. But also, like when you start to get to the edge of the road, and you like hit those things you would in real life that like try to wake you up when you go on them, that's on the controller. And I thought that was such a cool diegetic experience that I would not get elsewhere.
So it's interesting because I feel like I had almost an opposite experience, because when I first opened the box, the first thing I played was Asteroids Playroom, and like I said, I love it as a free game. I think it's an excellent free game, and I loved every little thing about this. Even blowing into it, I thought it just felt unique and fresh and fun, and that was a game designed for this. I played Spider-Man Miles Morales and I enjoyed it. As I went on, I found sometimes it adds things and sometimes it doesn't. First of all, I will say I'm surprised by how many developers have gone ahead and really worked with this controller. I thought, well, they're not going to add it. They can't do it for the Xbox controller, and that's the most widely used across Xbox and PC. Why would they do it for this? But they have. Because I went on, like, I played Spider-Man Remastered. I played, like, some DLC I had missed. And at that point, I was like, you know what? I like this in Miles Morales, but having played this, like, game I've already played, it doesn't add a lot. When I played,
I was kind of indifferent about it in Miles Morales.
when I played Resident Evil Village, which I played on PS5, I thought it was fine. I didn't think it felt necessary. When I played Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, I thought it was really cool, but way too powerful. And in that case, I was able to go into settings and turn it down. So I've sort of
That's
found.
what concerns me is sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
No,
But if developers don't work with this carefully, I worry you're going to get a lot of accessibility concerns with this controller because it can be really like it's not like it's a huge muscle strain. You can do it if you try, but the force that it requires for some actions in some games can get really tiring over time.
yeah, so like being able to go into settings and turn it down, or you could actually have turned it off into standard vibrate. But like that to me made me realize like it's really going to depend on how a studio implements it, if it's really useful enough. useful or not. In some games, like, it's really cool to have every different gun have a different feeling. Like in something
Mm-hmm.
like, apparently that's how they do in Deathloop. It's similar in
I've had
Resident
that
Evil,
happen with the bazooka in
but
one of the games that I play. My
but
boyfriend was really impressed by that. I thought it was just okay.
yeah, but in others, it's sort of a mix. So I think ultimately, Sony's controller is still more interesting,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't feel as essential as it did 1 year ago to me. That like when I switch to this and get like when I wanted to kick back with my PC or use the Xbox and I get like my more standard vibration, I think, you know what, this is okay. So it definitely depends on implementation.
I think I'll tell you why I wasn't super impressed by it in Asteroids Playroom. It's because the sensations that it was trying to manipulate or emulate for me are not things that I want to be feeling on my hands. It's like,
Oh, see
oh,
that.
you're walking through a sandy beach with your fingers. That's not more immersive to me.
Oh, see, I found it totally immersive. I remember one of the first things you do in Astro's Playroom is Astro goes down this water slide and then flies up in the air and plops into the water. And when I felt like that, I'm like, it felt like it plopped in the water. And to me, that was huge. But I haven't seen as much of that as opposed to, it being used as a gun in many different ways.
I
So I think
like
there,
when it's used to
yeah,
like convey information or increase immersion. Like part of the reason I liked that driving feeling in FF7 is because like if I were holding a steering wheel, I would feel that on my fingers. So feeling
right.
it in the controller felt natural to me.
That totally makes sense. So I found it to be, I think a lot of people found it very novel when it first came
Mhm.
out. And I think to some degree, look, that novelty has gone away to people who play it regularly, and either you love it or you hate it, or it depends on the implementation.
People are
I
going
know
to
Mike.
hate oh, go on, sorry.
I said I know Microsoft is just like executives have suggested maybe there will be a new controller that does something similar at some point, and like they haven't committed to anything at all. I'm not sure I would go out of my way for a new Xbox controller that does what Sony's does at this moment.
No. People are gonna hate me for it, but I think the best use case of HD Rumble I've seen, and I'm kind of hinting at it here, is in 1-2 Switch. I was really impressed when it said tilt the Joy-Con and feel how many ice cubes are
No,
inside the
I
Joy-Con.
that's actually really the first thing I compared the PlayStation, the DualSense to was the haptics feels very much like the Switch. Nintendo's done a great job in that regard.
One thing, but I think where I would really like to see the dual sense is in things like giving guns different feel,
Right.
increasing immersion or information like that comes across to you so that like you get another sense of engaging with the game that you couldn't have gotten before or gosh, what else was I going to say? Oh no, I'm blanking. Or like actual use case scenarios. Like for a racing game, you want the full analog trigger. But if you're doing something like a fighting game, you usually just want the digital input. So I'm interested to see if games are going to start doing it where you don't have to press the trigger all the way in order to actually get the thing. They'll use the adaptive trigger to give you short throw activation or something.
Interesting thing about the DualSense I want to mention, as a PC site, is that there are a handful of games that were developed for PlayStation that do like you can use this as a PC controller, but if you
Hmm.
want all of the DualSense features, you have to usually connect wired to the PC, and then you can, if they patch the game, you can get those same feelings. So if you want to feel that, you could go out and buy a dual sense controller in white or black or red, doesn't really matter, and try those. I haven't actually tried it with, I know Deathloop is one of them, but I know a lot of people before they confirmed that it would work with Deathloop, that, well, where do I play it? Like, how do I? And that was a deciding factor for a lot of people, that they knew this game was developed with this in mind. And I think it's cool that it is working on PC. I hope they find a way to make that work wirelessly, because that would be really nice.
This is a wild thought I just had, but talking about sort of HD Rumble and PC, do you think we're going to start seeing keyboards and mice with this kind of technology?
I mean, we kind of already have a little bit. Razer
There's
has its
definitely
haptics,
the
and
analog mice or analog keyboards, I
yeah,
should say.
Razer has those haptics. God, why am I blanking on the name of their haptics now? But for instance, they have headsets
Mm-hmm.
with their Hypersense is what they call it, right? And
Yes,
currently, I think
yes,
it's
yes.
largely in their headsets. But they had a thing at the CES a few years ago where they had a gaming chair and the headset, and I think even the mouse had some stuff in it, and it was all vibrating depending on where it came from in the game. I believe it was Overwatch at the time. And is it a little gimmicky? It felt it at the time, but years later, when the Switch has really excellent rumble and the DualSense has excellent rumble, and it's doing all stuff with audio and things like that on the PS5, like maybe it's time to go back to look at PC haptics. I don't know. I
Yeah,
think
it
a lot of
feels
people.
a little bit like Microsoft is behind in this way. And I know you said that they have these headsets with them, but like the primary means that I interact with games are still keyboard and mouse. And I feel like, I see chairs with haptics, I see headsets with
Yeah,
haptics. Good mice with haptics are still really rare. I assume that would throw off your aim a lot. But if I'm playing
yeah,
something
that's
more story focused, I don't
yeah,
care.
that's what I was gonna say. If I was playing a game that was a shooter, like Deathloop's a shooter, for instance, first person, largely non-competitive unless you play as Juliana, but it's a whole other story. But yeah, like if I was playing a game and my my wrist rest started rumbling and like my hands fell off the WASD keys, I'd be pretty pissed. But
Yeah.
I think it is
I
definitely
would buy a Rumble wrist rest. Maybe I'm wild there. That feels like one
no,
of the places where you could add it without too much hassle.
no.
Or like a
That's
Rumble wrist strap.
no, that'll be the problem with the PC. With the PC is that like RGB, it'll end up in like 600 different standards, and now like, whose are we going to rally around?
I just want to give Razer and Corsair and Steel Series all kinds of ideas. You can look extra gimmicky, guys. I know you love your RGB. I know you love your tack. You can look super tacky if you invest in haptics.
I mean, but like as we found out, it can't like through PlayStation, it can be good. But again, if developers don't support it well, it's not going to matter, and we've seen it here. But I think that's sort of been
Well,
something that
Razer's Hypersense has AI empowered haptics, so it doesn't have to be built into the game. I haven't tested it yet, but supposedly that's something you can do on PC.
yeah, the other cool thing would be to see is like a similar way. I think the sound on the controller might actually be the best part. I love it. I loved it when I played Miles Morales that like I could hear, oh, the thwips from the webs would actually sound like they're coming out of my wrists, right? That's not something you can really do on PC or Xbox yet, but it's the type of thing like I think they could figure out.
So I had a bad experience with the sound, which is that Miles Morales later on in the game, you get like a Super Saiyan move where you have electricity flowing all around you and you're
Yes,
just powered up, and the controller likes to emit a constant like bzzz when that mode is active. And
yes.
I had it break on me once. It's supposed to not sound, it's supposed to not be audible during cutscenes, I believe.
Oh,
But I had the game bug out, and during like a really intense story moment, because my meter was full when I went into that story moment, the controller was going bzzz the whole time, and it was the most obnoxious thing in the world.
so
I
yeah,
just
it's
feel like it might be annoying for some people.
yeah. I mean, again, that's typically a thing you can shut
Turn
off,
off,
especially
yeah.
because they're so big about. I'm glad Microsoft's gotten better about it. You remember the days when there was no headphone jack. The
Hmm.
fact that you can plug in headphones means you can turn that off entirely.
Yeah.
But we've hit a point like it's funny like to be on this like hardware website, talking about the hardware, but like the hardware is so similar. Like it's really been little things like that have differentiated this first year. Like, and I mean, I guess we'll see how that changes. I'm really curious to see if there's like a new elite controller that adds things
Hmm.
like that.
One
Or
thing that I've really enjoyed, as long as we're talking about little things that I want to make
yeah,
sure we hit on, is over the past few years, I've gotten really into Steam Link. I've gotten
yes,
over my fears of input lag, and I've been just like streaming in home from my desktop to my Raspberry Pi or my laptop or whatever. And I was like, boy, it sure would be great to do that with consoles. And the other day, my boyfriend needed the TV that our PS5 is set up to. So I streamed in home from my PS5 to my PS4, and it worked flawlessly. And it felt weird to be doing something like Steam Link on a console. Does Xbox have something like that? I don't remember.
A little bit. If you go through Xbox Game Pass Ultimate, you get xCloud,
Right, but
and
that's from
I
a
mean
server.
that is from a server, but you could also stream from your Xbox Series X or S to another device. So
Okay.
if you have the Xbox app, so like there was a point where I was trying that for a while. I was playing Assassin's Creed Valhalla for an increasingly long time, and that was a game I played on Series X. And there's a point like, oh, my wife wanted the TV. I'm like, well, I don't want to stop playing this game, so I'm going to hook up, one of those little claws that hooks up my phone to it. And I
Mm-hmm.
mean, horrible game to play on your phone. There are games that are better to play on your phone, but you could do that. Is it perfect? That's going to depend on your internet. I live in a New York City apartment, and there's stuff in the walls from like the 60s that I don't know what it is that sometimes blocks it. But in theory, that can work well. I've been in situations where it works well. So that doesn't require Game Pass to clear up. Game Pass is just for streaming it from the cloud.
Okay, great. So I think we've covered the PlayStation and the Xbox well enough. We've got about
Yeah.
10 minutes left in the show, and I just want to go ahead and dedicate that time to the other big new, quote unquote console contender, which is the Steam Deck, which is going to
Yes.
come out soonish. We talked about it a little bit earlier in the show, how it's been delayed to 2 months. But Andrew, you and I know we both have Steam Deck pre-orders. What do you think of the Steam Deck? I know that we've seen other handheld PCs like it before, like the GPD Win, and there's a new AMD Ion Neo, I think is what it's called. I don't know off the top of my head, but this is the first one from like a major company that your parents might have heard of, I think.
No, my parents haven't heard of Valve, but that's besides the point. I mean, I got to use it several months ago in like an early form, so I haven't seen the finished hardware, so it's hard to describe it that way. But yeah, I've never owned one of those other PCs, though I've tried them at many trade shows. They often have them sitting out, and I've never found them to be excellent experiences. Like having like slightly larger keyboards, like has never really worked for me. I think the big thing I'm still waiting for there is how that software is going to turn out. I know you can install Windows on it. I'm sure a lot of people are going to want to do that, or maybe dual boot. But I think Steam OS for a lot of people is just really what's going to make this thing work. And the fact that they're labeling which games are going to work, I'm not. Actually, I was going to say I'm not surprised. I'm a little surprised that Steam Deck is being delayed a month before launch. This thing was announced pretty recently. So I would have assumed somewhere that Valve had an idea where in the pipeline a month before launch they were going to be. So they
It's such
claim,
a small delay. I have to wonder what's causing it.
I don't know, they claim it's due to material shortages. They apologize. We're sorry about this. It's like one of the key phrases they repeat. So which I got to say, you see a lot of companies refuse to apologize about anything. So in a way, that's
Mhm.
kind of refreshing.
It almost
But
feels like a tentative delay to me. Like we're delaying it for 2 months now, just because that's what we're comfortable announcing at the moment, but we might
right.
have to delay it further in the future.
I find it really interesting because it was just in September where Valve was sending near final hardware to developers so they could see how their games run. And then you go to their on deck Twitter account and they're all showing these games running and look how cool this looks. Like it was definitely building up to this hype point. And then, I mean, I guess that's just the reality of the component shortage today. And it unclear if it's entirely components or if there are other materials that are in there. But I mean,
The
it's rough.
interesting thing about this delay for me is the Steam Deck, it's launching with a unique chip that has RDNA 2 like graphics in it, but is technically Zen 2.
Yes.
And I think,
Which
if
kind of
it
like the
gets
consoles.
delayed too long, is it going to launch underpowered?
I mean, going till February, it's a good question. Like AMD has a new generation of chips it's working on. I'm sure it's always how it is. I haven't heard too many. We haven't heard too many rumors about its next mobile, but it's also a custom chip, and there's not a ton of competitors in this space yet. I mean, you have the Switch,
Hmm.
which is kind of a totally different thing, running on the Tegra X1, which by like silicon standards is kind of ancient, though it's
Yeah, it's
magic how
NVIDIA
much they
Shield
pull.
tech, correct?
Yeah, so it's like kind of like magic how much they pulled out of there. So it's really only as it's only going to be as outdated as there are competitors. And if games are running well on it and they're optimized and the software support's really good, and look, you're going to have to run games on low or medium anyway on this thing. No one's expecting this to be running high.
Hmm.
Is it nice to have it 2 months early? But I don't think 2 months is going to have this huge delay unless someone has been planning for a long time to swoop in and be like, well, we actually have something, this custom chip we've been working with on Zen 3 and know what that is. And I mean, that would surprise me a lot. So
This
we will see.
actually brings us to a good question from our friend Rurutu M again, who asks, will TSMC have enough fab capacity to make anything newer than Zen 2? I can't know that, but that does bring up the idea of capacity. Fabs don't have enough capacity to make PS5s and
Right.
Xbox Series X's at this point, let alone new machines. I do feel almost irresponsible talking about how cool my brand new console is that people still can't get. I think despite all the features, all the which ones you should buy things we talked about, that has been the defining story of the new console generation so far. And I think that makes for great machines and oddly enough at the same time an underwhelming launch.
Yeah. I mean, I think the PS5 had the stronger launch. If you're talking on playing, like, oh, which one had more games and did it that way. Um, I mean, I think, like I said, Xbox is kind of preparing for that smoother transition overall. But I mean, I think part of the exciting launch is definitely sharing it with all your friends, right? Like you're all either talking about the same games or playing the same games. And to a degree, if you have these, like, yeah, the crossplay exists, but like you kind of can't do that as much. So it definitely takes something out of it. You obviously can't blame anyone for for a a pandemic launch. And at the time, I feel it. I even felt a bit like, well, why are they doing this now?
Part of
But
me
in
thought
retrospect,
maybe
if
they
they
should
waited,
just delay it. Do you think they should have delayed it? Part of me almost didn't buy this because I don't like the way the console looks. I still don't. Although I do love how quiet it is in comparison to the PS4. That's something I haven't
yeah,
talked about. And I think that stems from the big size and the design. But part
absolutely.
of me was like, I'll just wait for the PS5 Pro because I can't get this thing anyway. But,
Well, who knows?
that's still a few years down the line.
Yeah. Well, here's a question. Do you know this PlayStation had a hardware revision in its lifespan?
Yes, it did
So,
already. It
right.
has a
So
new,
it
smaller cooler that's actually more powerful.
smaller cooler, and I'm playing with little hardware on my, like, little screwdrivers on my desk. Smaller cooler, and it has the easier stand with the thumb screw. So do you know
You get an easier stand now?
if you got the other one, that you don't need a screwdriver to take the stand off?
I'll be honest, my boyfriend set up our PS5 while I
Oh, so
was
you don't
at
know which
work,
one it
so I
is?
don't know which stand he had. And he's busy right now, so I will have to
Yeah.
ask him that later.
See, so those, and so that's, I do wonder if that was a component shortage thing that they got around as well. But if it works, it works. I mean, I've been using the launch one and it's been totally fine. But
Mhm.
I mean, I think this is just clearly going to be the case for longer. It's going to happen when the Steam Deck does launch. It's going to happen when the Play Date launches. Everything is now like sneaker culture, where like
I
they're all really
yes.
used to this.
100%. I think the Playdate and the Steam Deck especially are interesting because right now you can only get those 2 through pre-order launch, like timed pre-order launch windows. So right now I have a Steam Deck release date in Q2 2022, but
Right.
that will be different than anyone else's Steam Deck release date. It's weirdly individualized. It's not something that, for a while, I think maybe into 2023 or 4, you can just like go into a store and buy on an impulse.
Yeah. I mean, that day will probably come. I I don't know,
I
but
just worry by the
it's
time that
yeah.
day comes, these consoles are going to be outdated. But I guess then if the new consoles have the same cycle, it won't matter.
I mean, it's tough to say. I mean, I'm sure if you're Microsoft or Sony, it's stressful not to be able to put these out, like if you work there. But on
Hmm.
the other hand, the PS5 selling about as well as the PS4 did. Like, the Xbox is saying this is the fastest they sold out, or the fastest they're selling at all. They're selling what they can make, right? So for
But how
them,
many
this
of
is
those things are getting into the hands of people who intend to use them, and how many are getting into the hands of people reselling them?
that's a really good question. I was on eBay the other day, and they're all still on eBay. So look, it's a rough thing, and it's funny that this is how we started the whole show, right? Was you can't talk about these two systems, which are technologically interesting, both in how we compare them to the PC hardware we usually talk about on our site, and at the games they came out with, and all that. But we should talk about other things as well, but that we can't talk about other things without circling back to this. I think that
Right.
really is in a nutshell, not just the show we had, but the story of the first year of the PS5 and the Xbox Series S and X. And I think it's just like such a wonderful way to encapsulate everything, even if it's upsetting to the people who can't get one.
In a way, it almost makes them more exciting, which I hate to say. It's that feeling when you're like, I don't want RX 5700, but I got it in the New Age Shuffle, and now I feel compelled to buy it, even though I don't have a system for it, you know?
Yeah.
So it feels like you're entering a special club when you get the new console, more so than with the last ones even.
I feel it. I mean, if you
Which
haven't,
I'm not saying is necessarily a good feeling to
yeah,
encourage. It's kind of dystopic in its own way. And,
yeah,
these consoles thrive, especially their new gimmicks thrive on having a wide user base, because then you can encourage developers to actually build around them. So I think it's going to hurt them in the long run, and they will probably try to push out as much inventory as they can to avoid it. But it's weird how we are currently dealing with the sneaker culture, like you said.
yeah. I mean, it's a tough thing. Hopefully, if you're trying to get one of these or a graphics card or anything, if that's what's gonna fill your heart, I hope you find it.
Mhm.
If not, we're lucky that games can be played on lower settings or older hardware, and
If that's what's
replacing.
gonna fill
Uh,
your heart.
well, but yeah, I mean, we're still in a really tough place right now, and it's like it feels like a real down note to end the show on. That like, hey,
But
you
it
still
does
can't get
lead
this,
me
but
into I'm currently talking to people. I can't make promises right now, but as we move into the holiday shopping season, I want to try to dedicate a few shows to tips on how to get consoles or graphics cards or other tech that you might be having a hard time getting. Again, I can't say anything for certain right now, but please pay attention to our socials, and we will keep you updated on that. And hopefully, we can help you find out not just what to buy, but where and how to buy it as well.
all right. Well, I will keep my eyes there for sure. I will follow Tom at Tom's Hardware on Twitter, and also follow Tom's Hardware on Facebook, and subscribe on
Yes.
Twitch, and also mash that subscribe button on YouTube. I'll do all
Thank
of
you
those
for
things.
being such a good follower, Andrew. And thank you again for joining me. I don't mean to steamroll you. If you want to share any final thoughts
No,
on the
I
consoles, feel free.
No, I mean, I think we really covered a lot of it. There's a lot of interesting things happen this year, but it's definitely clouded by inventory, and hopefully everyone who wants one gets one soon.
Awesome. So again, today I think is Xbox's 1 year birthday.
That was yesterday.
Yesterday was
Yeah.
Xbox's 1 year birthday. Tomorrow is
Early.
PlayStation's 1 year birthday. Both great machines. We both really enjoy them. Uh, Shame that you can't get them kind of overshadows it a little bit. Stay tuned for maybe tips on how to get them in your home and enjoy that greatness. In the meantime, please join us on tomshardware.com and pay attention to all of our lovely social medias like a great follower, Andrew.
All right.
Thanks
Thank you
so
very
much.
much. Bye.
All right. It's been great seeing you guys, and I will see you next Thursday at 3 p.m. Pay attention to our socials to see what that show will be about. And I'm going to roll the thing. Bye, everyone.